Welcome back. As you may or may not know, I'm known as Eli, the computer guy. My current project is something called SiliconDojo.com, where I'm trying to make a high-quality technology education as accessible as running water. It's an interesting thought. It's an interesting concept. We'll see how badly I flub it. Anyways, one of the things that I do is I do one-on-one conversations with my students every Monday between 1 to 5, where they ask questions. And when people ask me questions, generally I get a lot of the same question. And so I figured I'd do these little videos on YouTube, basically facts, FAQs, frequently asked questions. So they're here. So maybe I don't have to answer the same question a dozen times. I only have to answer it 11 times, not a dozen times. So anyways, the question I want to talk about today is how to get hired at a FAANG company. And surprise, surprise, I'm not going to give you the answer you want, though I am going to give you the answer you need. So the first thing to be thinking about when you think about when you get hired at a FAANG company, and I was considering this, right? I was sitting there and I was thinking about how to answer this question. I was thinking about the FAANG companies, and then I realized, the FAANG companies don't actually exist anymore, right? FAANG doesn't exist, right? Facebook, Apple, Netflix, and Google, that's what we talk about when we talk about the FAANG companies, is no longer there because Facebook and Mark Zuckerberg's wisdom changed their name to Meta. So it's not FAANG anymore, it's Mange. It's Mange. So you're not trying to get hired at a FAANG company, you're trying to get hired at a Mange company, which I don't know, if that does not sum up the modern world of the tech industry, I don't know what does, right? I would say I can't even write jokes like this, but it's not a joke. I'm just reading what's on the paper. So I thought that was kind of an interesting thing to be thinking about. Again, we went from the FAANG companies, and now they're the Mange companies. Anyways, makes me giggle. Makes me giggle. But people ask this question. Again, it goes along with this whole idea of, Eli, how do I get a job? Which is, to be clear, one of those tiresome questions out there. I get it. I know it's important to you. But it's also one of those very difficult things. Like, how do you get a job? Where are you? What is your skill set? What are your resources? What is your motivation? There's so much. Like, what does your face look like? Again, how many consonants are in your name? I know. I can't tell you why I know, but I know that if your name has too many consonants in it, your resume might end up in the trash can an inordinate amount of the times, right? Sad to say, but it's true. But anyways, that's one of the reasons I don't really like talking about how to get a job, because there's a lot of stuff. Again, how to answer or how to solve problems. Again, it's tech stacks, AWS versus Azure or whatever else. That's very interesting. Getting a job, But then we get to this whole question of how do you get a FAANG job, right? I want a FAANG job, Eli. And it becomes very curious with this whole thing, because I do wonder if people actually want a FAANG job. One of the things I've talked about for a long time is that people want our jobs. They don't actually want to do the work that goes along with our jobs, right? They want the pay, they want the respect, they want the job security, but they don't actually want to do the work, right? The work is a colossal pain in the ass. That's why we get paid a lot of money. We get paid a lot of money because nobody else wants to actually do the work. That's what it's really about, right? So anyways, one of the curious things that comes up is what happens when you have these people that don't actually want to do the work. They just want the job. And so since they don't want to do the work, and they don't really understand what the work is and what the work entails, right? It just becomes a story to them, the story of a job, right? When I have this job, I will have money. When I have this job, I'll have respect. When I have this job, whatever, right? They're not thinking when they get the work that needs to be done, they're going to be working 24-hour shifts. They're not thinking that. Again, they're thinking about the job. And then if you have this story about this job and who you will be when you have this job, then where do you want that story to be set? Do you want that story to be set at some Comcast help desk? Hell no. You want that story to be set at a FAANG company, right? There's this idea, there's this story of working for Facebook, Apple, Netflix, or Google, right? And so I think that's one of the things that people get locked into, is they get locked into the story of what they believe these jobs and these companies are like, and they don't really think about, yeah, but what is the work actually going to be like? What is your career going to actually be like? I think about this with, years ago, I went to a conference called Vlogger Fair. There's a guy called Chris Pirillo. I used to look up to Chris Pirillo. I was like, wow, he's got 150,000 subscribers. Oh, I wonder what that's like. Anyways, he was a successful YouTuber back in the day. And he created this conference called Vlogger Fair. And when I was at Vlogger Fair, I met somebody who worked for Google, and I was like, wow, what's it like to work for Google? And to say that they were nonchalant about it would be an understatement. Basically, he was like, well, it's a crappy job. It's a crappy job doing crappy work. Basically, he said he got paid decently, and he wasn't sure what he wanted his next step to be. I guess he worked for a company that kind of got like acqui-hired. He didn't get equity with the acqui-hire. He just got acqui-hired by Google. And so he ended up working for Google, and he was just ever so unamused about it. Because basically he was just working for a crappy, mangy ass company. Again, when you think about FAANG or you think about mange, right? You think about FAANG companies. They're young, they're exciting, and they're cool, right? But you think about a lot of these tech companies now. Again, the FAANG companies, Facebook, Apple, Netflix, and Google. Facebook is 20 some odd years old, 21 years old, something like that now. Apple is like 50 years old, somewhere around 50 years old. Netflix is 25, 26 years old. And Google is, again, also 26, 27 years old. They're not actually new companies anymore, right? They sell themselves on the idea of being these fast-moving, move fast and break things, hard-charging startup companies. But the reality is that there isn't, that they aren't, right? Again, if you were working for Microsoft in the 1990s, and that's basically like what these companies are like. Think about what Microsoft was like in the 1990s, which is fine. I mean, it was a good job and all that, but we wouldn't be that damn excited about it, right? And because it was just it was a corporate tech job. And so a lot of these companies, again, they've basically turned into these massive corporate behemoths. And so when you get a job at a massive corporate behemoth, do you think you're going to be moving fast and breaking a lot of shit? I'm sorry. Let's pull out the SOPs. Let's pull out the employee handbook. And let's make sure we go through the flow chart to verify that we're moving fast and breaking things in the correct order that we're supposed to do it. Make sure that when you break something, that you fill out the form in triplicate and make sure you get all the 20 signatures you need for that thing that you broke. All right. And that's the thing, is when you start looking at these companies, the reality is that they are old, becoming decrepit companies. Again, you look at like what happened during COVID and then the aftermath of COVID, where they hired so many people, right? They hired tens of thousands of people. Why? Who the fuck knows? Tech companies are supposed to scale what's called exponentially, not linearly. What does linearly mean, right? So if I have a hamburger stand, and it takes, 5 people to serve 100 hamburgers per hour, then if I'm selling 200 hamburgers per hour, basically I need 10 people. 300 hamburgers per hour, and basically I need 15 people. You do get some efficiencies, but you don't get a lot of efficiencies. Anyways, that's the idea with scaling linearly. Like if you have a plumbing company, right? If you have one customer, then you need one plumber. If you have 2 customers at the same time, then you need 2 plumbers. If you have 3 customers at the same time, then you need 3 plumbers, right? That's scaling linearly. Exponentially, again, is the idea with servers, right? If you have 1 server to maintain, you need 1 technician. If you have 100 servers to maintain, you need 2 technicians. If you have 1,000 servers to maintain, you need 3 technicians. That's scaling exponentially. And so if you look at a lot of these, these mange companies, when COVID hit, it's weird. There are these major tech companies that were growing as if they scaled linearly. Facebook hired 20,000 people. Like, why? I don't even understand. No part of that even makes sense. What does make sense is 2 years later when they fired 20,000 people or 25,000 people or whatever it was, right? That made sense. And the issue that you run into with a lot of these companies is, again, they're large corporations. They're worried about the shareholder value, making sure that the value of stock goes up. They're worried about their bureaucracies. They're worried about their org charts and all of those types of things. And so the issue that you run into is that many times these companies are not the innovative, exciting environments you think they are. They're just old school tech companies. Again, imagine working for Xerox in the 1990s, or Microsoft in the 1990s, or Kodak in the 1990s, or IBM in the 1990s. Again, you may have had a good paycheck and all that, but it wasn't the most freaking exciting thing in the world. And so, again, if we fast forward 25 years and we start looking at the current versions of those companies, that's what you start seeing. And so one of the questions that you need to ask yourself is, do you want to work for a FAANG company, or do you want to work for the story of a FAANG company, what you think, right? And that's where I argue is you need to start thinking about the work that you actually need to do or that you want to do, and not the job. Right, because we see this recently with Google, right? So Google have been dumping a lot of money into their hardware department, right? Their Pixel phones and their Chromebooks and slates. Anyways, they were putting a tremendous amount of money into their hardware department, and then they basically just killed it. They just killed it. Gone, right? We look at this with Amazon, the Alexa, right? So all computers were supposed to be voice activated by now. We were supposed to be living in the Star Trek world where I walk into my home and I say, "Computer, make me a cup of coffee," and my cup of coffee is made, right? Again, you saw the Echo devices and the Dot devices, all that kind of stuff. You go back about 10 years ago, that was supposed to be the revolution, and the revolution didn't happen. So they just basically killed the Alexa department, right? I guess they're now making it an AI thing, but they literally, hardware and software and the rest of it, they just gutted the ever-loving crap out of that department. And so one of the things to be considering then is, imagine if you worked in one of those departments. What if that is the work that you enjoy doing? You enjoy doing IoT, you enjoy doing whatever hardware, you enjoy doing X, Y, or Z, and all of a sudden the company eliminates your department. Again, I think about this with a guy, Jerry Berg. There's a channel called Nerdgasm. That's curious. Nerdgasm used to be much better. Anyways. Oh, it's weird being an old timer in the YouTube world. You see the rise and the not so rise of so many channels. Anyways, there's this guy, Jerry Berg, Nerdgasm, and he was talking about, he used to work for Microsoft. Again, back at Microsoft in the 2015 or so, I think was when he got laid off. But the interesting thing there is he had awards, and he had gotten bonuses and all that kind of stuff. And then he walked into Microsoft one day, and his entire department was laid off. Again, when I tell you business isn't personal, to give you a hint about how impersonal this was for him, the entire department was gone. They were just like, 2,500 people just don't need to come to the office anymore, right? And that's what working for a large bureaucratic, mangy ass corporation is like. Does that sound like the sexy FAANG company that you think that you're going to get involved in? And so that's where I'd suggest with most people, instead of thinking about the FAANGs of the world, is that they start thinking about what work it is that you want to do. What work you're not passionate about, what work fulfills you? When you sit down and you do 8 hours of whatever the work is, what makes you feel like, yeah, I feel pretty good about that? Again, some people like to do coding. Some people like to huff solder fumes. Some people like to deal with customers or do training or education. Some people like to do recruiting and that type of thing, right? There's a whole bunch of different work that needs to be done within our profession. And one of the big questions that you need to ask yourself is, what are you actually interested in? And then what fulfills you? And then go out and try to find the jobs that might actually put you down the path you want to be down, right? Again, think about this, right? So you get hired by Google. You get hired by Google. Yay! And then you get put into a department to work on a project that will never get released. Right? That's reality. That's reality. Wow, you work for Google. What have you worked on that I would know? Nothing. They keep killing my projects. Right? That's how Google rolls. Where the thing to be thinking about is, if you go out and you work for a lot of the startup companies out there, or a lot of other technology companies out there, they are doing a lot of interesting things that you might be very fulfilled doing the work for. Again, that may not necessarily be a company that you may have thought about. Now, again, I think about this with Blues. There's a company called Blues, Blues. They're really cool. They deal with IoT communication. So they have these little modem cards, and you can use them for Arduinos and Raspberry Pis and computers and the whole 9 yards. They've got this whole system set up, so you can use them. You can use IoT Wi-Fi communication. You can do LTE communication. You can even do satellite communication, right? So if you're really interested in IoT and you're really interested in all that kind of stuff, looking at a company like Blues, who's actually dealing with the software and the hardware and the entire tech stack, that might make you a hell of a lot more fulfilled than, again, working for one of the FAANG companies. Again, one of the interesting things is when you start looking at hardware. So back when I was doing a lot of interviews, so I've done a lot of interviews over the years with people on the main channel, and one of the curious things is, so much of the hardware stuff, again, and I would argue the interesting IoT hardware stuff, is actually out of the Midwest. Like Lincoln, Nebraska. One of my old sponsors was there. It's so horrible, I forget who they were. They were a good sponsor. I should remember their name. I don't remember their name. Anyways, they were out of Lincoln, Nebraska. I had another company that I dealt with. I think they were out of Minneapolis. And one of the curious things is, they were working a lot of interesting, like IoT, environmental kind of hardware platform systems, right? And they're not necessarily in the West Coast or Boston or the places that you might think a lot of these tech companies would be. And so what I would argue for a lot of folks out there is, instead of focusing on the story, start thinking about the work that you actually want to do, and then start researching the companies that will allow you to do that type of work. And remember, the smaller companies many times are going to give you better opportunities, right? The larger a company is, the more bureaucracy there's going to be. Again, whether it's IBM, whether it's the federal government, or whether it's Google at this point in time. Whereas a smaller company, right, the org chart is not nearly as big, right? You could probably write the org chart on a bar napkin, right? And basically with that, that gives you a lot of freedom. That gives you a lot of opportunity to be able to play in different areas. We talk about this with collisions, right? I've talked about this, right? We're in this weird work from home world, right? Everybody knows the most productive employees work from home. We know that. Again, in 2015, we're all supposed to be colliding all over the place. There's this thing called collisions. And anyways, everybody was supposed to be in the work, everybody was supposed to be at the office, and they were supposed to be colliding 1,000 times a day. I don't know how they got any work done, but that was a big thing. 2015 was all about collisions, right? But here's the thing: one of the big things with collisions, especially with small companies, right? Let's say you're working on the software stack. So you go to Blues. Let's say you go over to this company called Blues. Again, good company. Go take a look at Blues. Let's say you're in this company Blues, and you get hired to work on the text on the coding stack, because that's what you know, right? Well, then you're sitting there and you get more and more interested in the hardware components. Again, how do the modems work? How does the satellite communication work? All that kind of thing. Here's the deal. If you're in a small company, you know what you can probably do? You can probably walk down the hall and knock on the guy's door who's coming up with the schematics for the circuits and say, hey, I was curious, would you be willing to sit down? I'll buy you a cup of coffee and explain how this circuitry stuff works a little bit better, right? That's what you can get in a small company. If you're working for Google, you're working for these major companies with campuses. Those campuses are awesome. Don't get me wrong. Campuses are fabulous. But you know what campuses are? Huge, huge. Guess what? You're probably not going to collide with the person on the other side of the campus ever. Even if you're sitting there and you're like, you know what? I really would like to know more about how our company does X, Y, or Z. You got to go all the way to the other side of the campus to try to talk to that person. And probably when you go there, they're going to be out, taking a crap or going to lunch anyway. They're like, oh, this is frustrating. You got to go back and forth and figure it all out. Right? That's what the large bureaucracy starts to look at like. Whereas again, if you start working for these smaller companies, I think it makes a lot more sense. The other thing too is things like equity, right? But I want to make money. I want to make the money. Here's one of the things I'll point out to you with Fang. It's basic math, right? So you look at Apple. I think Apple is currently worth $2 trillion, something like $2 trillion. Maybe it's $3 trillion. Maybe it's $5 trillion. I don't know. Trillions of dollars. Here's the thing. So if you buy $1 of Apple stock, right, or $1,000 of Apple stock, in order to turn $1,000 of Apple stock into $2,000 of Apple stock, if Apple is currently worth $2 trillion, it means the value of that entire company has to go from $2 trillion to $4 trillion. Right? The larger the valuation the company gets, the harder it is to keep that rate of growth up. Generally, going from $2 trillion to $2 trillion is difficult. Going from $2 trillion to $4 trillion is difficult. Going from $4 trillion to $8 trillion, God help us when that actually happens, right? Because it just, the numbers just get to be so massive. It just gets to be so expensive, right? So if you go in and you get equity and you're like, yeah, I'm going to make my fortune off of this stock going up. What is the room for growth for your stock? Again, like bringing up Tesla. Not going to get into politics, but I think Tesla is an interesting example. Where basically the investors priced in so much growth to the stock. Again, it got to be over $1 trillion before the company had actually hit that mark. And the issue is now, for the past couple of years, it's just kind of been floating. It's been floating between, like, say, $1 trillion, somewhere around $1 trillion, not about $600 million. It keeps going like this. And the reason is because it goes down, and the people say, oh, it needs to be worth more money. But then it hits that $1 trillion mark, and people are like, oh, that's a lot of money. And then it goes down again, and people are like, well, that's too little. And it goes up to about $1 trillion, like, that's too high. Right? You start to get, it's called a band. It's called the trading band you get into, where people just get comfortable with the stock being in this particular band. And so one of the questions is, again, you go to a large company, even if you get good equity in it, what does the growth potential for that equity actually look like? Whereas you go for a smaller company or even a startup company, right? If the company you get hired at, right, has a $5 million valuation, right? And again, you do your research and you honestly believe it's a good company. And remember, again, a lot of people think startups are risky, but large companies are risky. I had a buddy of mine who worked for WorldCom. Do you remember WorldCom? Yeah, he was going to retire. He did not retire. He did not retire. He had so much equity. He had so many options in WorldCom. So many options. Boosh. Anyways, right? So one of the things to think about, again, a lot of people think startup companies or small companies could fail, but large companies fail too. But think about this, right? Again, if you're trying to go for that gazillionaire, right? You want the gazillions of dollars. So Apple going from $2 trillion to $4 trillion. That's hard. Here's the deal. Your startup company that you just got hired on with as first employee or whatever, second employee, they're current at a $5 million valuation. How hard do you think it is to go from a $5 million valuation to a $10 million valuation? I'll tell you what the answer is. All it takes is somebody to pull that number out of their ass. It's sad. Many years ago, I had to talk to old white people about things like valuations. It was not pretty for any of us. It was not pretty for any of us. Yeah, because that's what you find out. When you're dealing with small numbers, basically valuations are pulling shit out of your ass, quite literally. So going from $5 million to $10 million is basically all you have to get is an investor to pull it out of their ass. And so you get your equity at a $5 million valuation. You get some investor to come in and say, sure, it's worth $10 million. You have literally just doubled the value of your equity because somebody pulled it out of their ass. Going from $10 million to $50 million in valuation, again, as long as you hit KPIs. And that's what the money people say. They'll get very serious about KPIs, key performance indicators, as long as you hit your KPIs. Yeah, you know, what are the KPIs? Because KPIs probably aren't profit, the KPIs probably aren't revenue, and the KPIs are ever less things like user engagement. There are gonna be some weird ass KPIs. And then all of a sudden you got 50 million. You have now 10x'd your equity because of dumb crappery. And it's amazing how a decent company, again, go for a good company that makes sense in the whole 9 yards. It's amazing how a company can go from a $5 million valuation to a $1 billion valuation over God knows what. Again, remember WeWork. WeWork got up to a $44 billion valuation before it was no longer worth $44 billion. Right? That's kind of like how a lot of these valuations work. And so think about it. You get with this company, you go from $5 million to $1 billion. That's a 200x increase in the value of the equity you got with the company. That is going to make you a multimillionaire. Versus, again, you go to work for one of the mange companies, they give you the equity, and then you got to wait for it to double. Do you think Apple is going to 200x? Again, I don't have to be snarky. That's not even being snarky. It's just not going to 200x. It's just not going to. God, I hope it's not going to happen. Anyway, it's not going to happen, right? And so that's some of the things we think about. Because again, like when you think about going with the FAANG companies, what is it? You know, I want to be working at the cutting edge of technology. Do you really think you're going to get that working at a mange company? I want to be doing work that's important. Well, that sure fuck ain't going to be happening to those companies, right? Right? I want again, you know, job security or whatever else. As we see, they just eliminate tens of thousands of people at a time. And again, the big thing is I want to make the real money. And again, I think there's a real argument there. Probably not. Again, if you're a rock star, if you're one of the rock stars, I mean, they talk about that, $500,000 a year plus equity. Take the equity, sell it, buy something else. Yeah, sure. Yeah, I took all my my Apple stock and bought the S&P 500. Anyways, bought Nvidia. Nvidia's is Nvidia still good? I don't know where Nvidia's at right now. So anyways, basically what I would argue is you want to get hired at a FAANG company before they're a FAANG company. You want to get hired at Nvidia 5 years ago. You probably don't want to get hired at Nvidia now. No offense to Nvidia, but you know, it's at $4 trillion, something ridiculous. Getting hired at Nvidia now? Unless you're a rock star, is that really what you want? See, if you got hired at Nvidia 5 years ago, oh hell yeah, that would be a great place to be right now. So there you go. Some things to be thinking about. What work do you want to do? What work? Focus on the work and then find the job that will allow you to do that work and give you the pay and benefits and everything else that you want. Think about doing it that way, would be my argument. And if you still want to go work for a FAANG company, I don't know, go watch the tech lead videos or whatever else. He'll teach you how to lead code. Who needs to actually solve problems when you can spend 500 hours lead coding? You know, I think about that. Like, I get a lot of the young people now, again, this whole leak code crap. And a few years ago, I was interviewing a CEO at a development company. And I was asking the CEO about certifications, right? So, I come from the IT world, MCSE, MCP, MCITP, MCSA. Anyways, we had lots of certifications. So I was talking about certifications. I was like, you know, what are the programming certifications? Is there a JavaScript or a PHP or a Python certification? And the curious thing that he said is he was like, look, I do not care about certifications. Do not care at all about certifications. And I asked why. And he said, well, because basically there's only so many hours in the day, right? When you're trying to get a job, you're trying to get ahead in your career, there's only so many hours. And so basically, if you have certifications, it shows what you prioritize. He was like, look, if you come in and you have two people and one person has a portfolio, has done work, has shown that he can solve problems, and the other person has certifications, then then again, the person that walked in the door with certifications has literally proven what they think is important, which is absolutely incorrect. So he'd always hire the portfolio people. And so what I want you to think about with this whole elite code horse crap is you're sitting there spending 500 hours or whatever studying elite code questions in order to get a job at a company that forces you to spend 500 hours learning how to answer elite code questions. Does that sound like you're going to be getting a job when you're actually going to be solving problems that you care about? Or does that sound like a company that has a hell of a lot of bureaucracy and a crap ton of people trying to prove why they should still get the insane salary they've been getting for the past 10 years? So anyways, some things to ponder, some things to think about. So yeah, I've only got a couple days left here in Miami. So I've been here in Miami, or Miami Beach. Miami Beach is actually a different town. We've been here for about a month. I have a day and a half left here to go back to Asheville, North Carolina. Then we will probably be coming back. We like Miami. I like the airport. Oh, let me tell you, an airport with non-stops to damn near everywhere, that is a beautiful thing. But the people here are really nice. Again, I've talked with a lot of people that live here. They're pretty happy. The cost of living is now comparative to Asheville, North Carolina. That is not a joke. Again, I'm not a comedian. I am not Steven Crowder. I just read what's on the paper, and then we all giggle sadly together. Yeah, no joke. It's about cost comparative. Or Miami, I suppose, is truly cost comparative. Miami Beach, again, we're gonna go into a condo. We're gonna go into a fancy condo. Pools, workout rooms. Like the condo that we're gonna probably go into literally has its own dog daycare. Anyways. So yeah, we're probably gonna be coming back here. Looks like a good place. Good times. Lots of good little tech events going on, that type of deal. So yeah. Guess you'll be seeing this view in the background in a little bit. Anywho, that's all I gotta say. See y'all later.